Imagine taking a simple photo with your dad on vacation, only to look closer and realize that everything you thought you knew about your life was a lie. For 18 years, Ellie Gibson believed she had a normal childhood, loving parents, and a home in the US. But one innocent snapshot in London changed everything. In the background of that picture was a missing person flyer, a little girl who had disappeared years ago. A girl who looked exactly like Ellie. At first, it seemed like a strange coincidence. But when her father ripped the flyer down, when her parents refused to show her any childhood photos, when she overheard a whispered conversation that made her blood run cold, Ellie realized she had to uncover the truth. And the truth was worse than she ever could have imagined. Because Ellie Gibson wasn't who she thought she was. She was a kidnapped child. And the people she had called Mom and Dad for her entire life, they were the ones who had stolen her. What happens when your world shatters in an instant? When the people you love the most are the ones who have betrayed you beyond repair. This is Ellie's story. And trust me, you won't believe how it ends. It was a crisp, bright morning in London, the kind of day that felt like it had been made for exploring. The River Thames shimmered under the golden sunlight, reflecting the towering majesty of the Tower Bridge in its rippling surface. The lively energy of the city pulsed all around, tourists taking photos, street musicians playing soft melodies, and the distant chime of Big Ben marking the passage of time. Ellie Gibson, 18 years old and wide-eyed with wonder, walked alongside her father, Henry Gibson, along Queen's Walk. The historic charm of the city, with its blend of old-world architecture and modern vibrance, left her breathless. This was her first time visiting London, and everything about it felt like a dream come to life. She turned to her father, her dark blonde hair catching the sunlight, and smiled. "We should do this more often, Dad. It's been amazing so far." Henry chuckled, his warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners as he glanced at her. "Sweetheart, we've pretty much emptied out our holiday savings jar for this one. If you want another trip next year, you might have to cut back on that online shopping habit of yours." Ellie gasped in mock offense, pressing a hand to her chest. "Excuse me? First of all, it's not a habit, it's an investment. Second, I don't mind cutting back if it means more trips like this." Henry laughed, shaking his head as they continued their leisurely walk. It was the kind of easy, playful banter that had always defined their relationship. Ellie had always felt lucky to have a dad like Henry, fun, supportive, and always up for an adventure. The cool London breeze carried the scent of the river, mingling with the aroma of fresh coffee from a nearby street vendor. Ellie took a deep breath, letting herself soak in the moment. This was what happiness felt like: no stress, no worries, just her and her dad making unforgettable memories together. As they rounded a corner, Tower Bridge came into full view, its grand iron framework standing proudly against the backdrop of the clear blue sky. Ellie felt her heart skip a beat at the sight. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, already thinking about how perfect this spot would be for a picture. Before she could suggest it, however, something else caught her attention. A man with a sleek, portable photo booth stood just a few feet away, his setup looking polished and professional. It reminded her of the kind used at weddings or fancy events, the kind that printed instant souvenir photos on high-quality paper. The man, noticing their American accents, approached them with a friendly smile. "Hello there. How about a lovely souvenir photo? My booth prints on magnetic surfaces instantly, and I'll throw in a digital copy as well. Only £9.99 for the both of you." Ellie's eyes lit up. "Dad, can we? It would be perfect to remember today." Henry hesitated for just a moment, then sighed with good-natured defeat. All right. You and your souvenirs." Ellie grinned triumphantly. They stepped up to the photo booth, positioning themselves near the iron railing, the majestic Tower Bridge towering behind them. Henry hugged her from behind, a warm, fatherly embrace, as they both smiled for the camera. The soft whir of the machine filled the air as the booth came to life, printing their image onto a small magnetic sheet. The vendor handed the print to Henry, who took one look at it, and froze for just a second. A flicker of something crossed his face. Surprise? Shock? Whatever it was gone in an instant. Henry quickly tucked the photo into his pocket, clearing his throat as he handed over the cash. Ellie, still beaming, reached for her phone as the vendor offered to send the digital copy. "Dad, let me see. Did we look good?" Henry forced a smile, ruffling her hair. "Let's head back first, sweetheart. Your mom's waiting, and we've been out since morning." Ellie frowned slightly, sensing the subtle shift in his tone, but let it go. Maybe he didn't like the way he looked in the photo. After all, it was just a picture. A simple, harmless souvenir. Or so she thought. The path along Queen's Walk was lively, filled with the chatter of tourists, the occasional bark of a passing dog, and the distant melody of a street musician playing an old tune on his violin. The majestic Tower Bridge loomed in the distance, its iron framework standing proud against the blue London sky, its reflection shimmering on the gentle ripples of the River Thames. Ellie, caught in the moment, slowed her steps, her fingers tightening around the strap of her crossbody bag. "Dad, look at that view," she said, tilting her head toward the bridge. "This is exactly the kind of place we need a photo together." Henry followed her gaze and smirked. "Oh, I see where this is going." Ellie turned to him, already grinning. "Come on, it's perfect. You know Mom's going to complain if we come all the way to London and don't take at least one decent picture together." Henry chuckled. "Alright, fine. But I'm not doing any of those social media poses you always make me do." Before Ellie could respond, her attention shifted to a man standing just a few steps away, near the railing overlooking the river. His small portable photo booth gleamed under the sunlight, a sleek, modern setup that looked professional, the kind she had seen at weddings or upscale events. A neatly printed sign read, "Instant London Memories. Magnetic print plus digital copy, £9.99. As if sensing her interest, the vendor, a middle-aged man with a friendly face, approached with a welcoming smile. "Hello there. Would you like a lovely souvenir photo? My booth prints instant magnetic copies, and you'll get a digital version too." His voice was cheerful, practiced, the kind that made it clear he had pitched this offer countless times before. "A perfect memory of your trip to London." Ellie's eyes lit up. "Oh, Dad, can we?" She turned to Henry, practically bouncing on her heels. "We don't have a photo together yet, and this is way better than a selfie." Henry exhaled in amusement, shaking his head. "You're persistent, you know that." "I learned from the best," she quipped, nudging him playfully. The vendor grinned. "That's the spirit. Come, stand over here, the light is best from this angle." Ellie and Henry positioned themselves near the iron railing, the historic bridge stretching behind them. A vintage-style street lamp framed the shot perfectly, adding to the classic London aesthetic. Henry hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, wrapping his arms around Ellie in a warm fatherly embrace. Ellie leaned into him, resting her hands lightly over his, her expression radiating happiness. "This is going to be so cute," she said, already imagining how she'd caption it when she posted it online. The vendor adjusted the lens and smiled. "Alright, big smiles now. 1, 2. The camera clicked. A soft whirring sound filled the air as the photo booth came to life, processing their picture. A moment later, a small magnetic print slid out of the machine, crisp and colorful, capturing what should have been a perfect snapshot of a father and daughter on vacation. But something about the way Henry's expression briefly changed as he accepted the photo made Ellie pause. A flicker of something. Surprise? Discomfort? She opened her mouth to ask, but before she could say a word, Henry had already tucked the picture into his pocket, his fingers tightening around it just slightly too much. Ellie frowned. "Dad, can I see?" Henry cleared his throat. Let's head back first, sweetheart. We've been out for a while. Your mom's probably wondering where we are. Ellie hesitated, a small nagging feeling creeping in, but she quickly pushed it aside. It was just a picture. Just a simple, harmless photo. At least, that's what she thought. The software of the photo booth filled the air as the vendor stepped forward, retrieving the freshly printed magnetic photo from the machine. He examined it briefly before handing it over to Henry with a satisfied nod. There you go. A perfect memory of your trip to London. Ellie, still buzzing with excitement, shifted on her feet, already reaching for her phone as the vendor tapped on the screen, sending her the digital copy of the picture. She grinned, eager to see how it turned out. Dad, let me see the print, she chirped, glancing up, only to find Henry standing eerily still, the photo clutched tightly in his hand. For the briefest moment, his expression flickered, a split second of something unusual. His fingers curled tighter around the edges of the glossy print, his posture stiff. Ellie blinked. Had she imagined that? Dad? Henry startled, as if suddenly aware of her watching him. His face relaxed into a practiced smile, but there was something about it, something too forced, too unnatural. Looks great, sweetheart, he said quickly, folding the photo in half before slipping it into the pocket of his jacket. Let's get going. Ellie hesitated. Why was he putting it away so fast? Her first instinct was to brush it off. Maybe he just didn't like how he looked in the picture, he always complained about his smile in photos. Maybe the lighting was bad, or his hair was out of place. Still, something about the way he had reacted, like he had seen something he wasn't supposed to, made a small, nagging unease settle in the pit of her stomach. She forced a casual laugh. Hey! Keeping it all to yourself, she teased, nudging him playfully. What, did I blink or something? Henry let out a chuckle, but his fingers were still in his pocket, as if making sure the photo was still there. Come on, Ellie, he said, his tone lighter but his movements hurried. Your mom's waiting, and we've been out all morning. Let's go. Ellie opened her mouth to protest, but he had already started walking ahead. Her phone vibrated, the vendor had sent the digital copy. She could look at it on the way back. Shrugging off the odd moment, Ellie took one last glance at the photo booth, then jogged after her father, letting the thought slip away. It was just a picture. Just a simple photo. That's what she told herself. But deep down, she knew something about it had unsettled him. And for reasons she couldn't yet understand, that unsettled her too. The walk back to their Airbnb was peaceful, the streets of South London still buzzing with the morning crowd. Ellie scrolled through her phone absent-mindedly as she walked beside Henry, their earlier stop at the photo booth already a distant memory. Their Airbnb, a cozy second-floor apartment on Borough Street, was just a short 5-minute walk away. When they arrived, Ellie flopped onto the couch, pulling her feet up beneath her as she unlocked her phone, eager to check the digital copy of their photo. She tapped the screen, and there it was, the perfect snapshot of a father and daughter in front of Tower Bridge. The composition was stunning, the lighting just right. Ellie smiled. This turned out amazing, she murmured, already opening her editing app to adjust the brightness and contrast. From across the room, Henry had been watching her. Hey, he said suddenly, straightening up. I think I'll take out the trash. Ellie barely glanced up, focused on fine-tuning the image. Huh? Now. Henry was already gathering the bags, his movements quick, almost restless. Yeah. We've already got too much lying around, and I could use some fresh air. Ellie frowned, pausing for just a second. That was weird. Back home, Henry never rushed to take out the trash. If anything, he always tried to pass that job on to Mom or her. So why the sudden eagerness now? Okay, she said slowly, watching as he headed for the door, a little too fast, as if he was trying to get out before she asked any more questions. Shrugging, she turned her attention back to her phone, her fingers adjusting the brightness slider. She zoomed in slightly, focusing on the details in the background. That was when she saw it. A green trash bin stood out behind them in the photo, positioned just a few steps away from where they had taken the picture. At first glance, it was nothing out of the ordinary. But as Ellie zoomed in further, she noticed something pinned to the side of it. A missing person flyer. Her brows furrowed as she squinted at the small, grainy text. The image was blurry, but she could just barely make out the face of a little girl. Above the child's photo, in bold capital letters, were the words, "Still missing." A strange, unexplainable feeling washed over her, something cold settling deep in her stomach. Why did this feel so familiar? Ellie chewed the inside of her cheek, her fingers hovering over the screen. It was just a random flyer, right? And yet, something about it made her uneasy. She was still staring at it when she heard the front door click shut. Henry had left with the trash. For the first time since their morning walk, she felt a tiny, persistent voice in the back of her mind whispering something she couldn't quite put into words. Something wasn't right. She just didn't know what. Not yet. Ellie stared at the blurry image of the flyer, her eyes fixed on the little girl's face. Though the photo was small and grainy, there was something about it, something unsettling. The words "still missing" stood out boldly above the child's picture, demanding attention. She swallowed hard, tilting her phone slightly to see if a different angle would make the image clearer. The girl's face was round, with soft features and wide, searching eyes. Ellie's stomach twisted with a strange, unexplainable sense of familiarity. Why did this girl look so recognizable? A chill crawled up her spine, but she quickly shook off the feeling, forcing herself to exhale. She was overthinking it. Missing person flyers were common. Every city had them, posters on street corners, pinned to bulletin boards, taped to lamp posts. It wasn't unusual to see one, especially in a place as large and crowded as London. That had to be it. Still, she couldn't quite ignore the tiny seed of discomfort that had taken root in her chest. She sat back against the couch, staring at the photo for a few more seconds before finally tapping the share button. "London Adventures with Dad," she captioned it, adding a few emojis to keep the tone lighthearted. The picture uploaded instantly. Within seconds, likes and comments started rolling in, but Ellie barely paid attention. The excitement from earlier had dimmed, replaced by something she couldn't explain. She heard the sound of footsteps and looked up as her mother, Lisa, walked into the room, towel drying her hands. "There you two are," Lisa said with a smile. "How was your morning walk?" Ellie forced herself to snap out of it, tucking her phone into her lap. "It was great," she said, managing a smile. "We got some breakfast, walked along the river. Oh. And we took a photo with one of those instant souvenir booths by Tower Bridge." Lisa's expression brightened. "Oh, that's nice. Where's the print? Let me see." Ellie glanced toward Henry's empty chair, remembering the way he had hurriedly shoved the photo into his pocket. "Dad has it," she said, her voice casual, though her mind replayed the moment again. "But I have the digital one. Here." She turned her phone around, showing her mom the picture on the screen. Lisa leaned in, nodding approvingly. "Ah, that's lovely," she said. "You should send that to me later." Ellie nodded. "Already posted it." Lisa laughed. "Of course you did." For a moment, the unease faded, pushed aside by the comfort of her mother's presence. Lisa stretched, glancing toward the door. "Where's your dad, by the way?" Ellie hesitated. "Taking out the trash," she said after a pause. Lisa arched an eyebrow. "Really?" Ellie shrugged. "Yeah, I know. It's weird." Lisa laughed softly. "Well, at least he's getting some fresh air." Ellie forced a chuckle, but her mind wasn't entirely there. She stole another glance at her phone screen. The missing person flyer was still lingering in her thoughts, but she pushed it away. It wasn't important. At least, that's what she told herself. Because if it was important, if it meant something, what did that mean for her? The midday sun cast long shadows over the cobblestone streets as Ellie and Lisa strolled back along the Queen's Walk, retracing the same path Ellie and Henry had taken earlier that morning. The city was alive with the hum of conversation, the rhythmic clatter of footsteps, and the occasional call of seagulls circling above the Thames. Ellie had shaken off most of her unease, chalking it up to travel exhaustion and an overactive imagination. She had told herself, really told herself, that the missing child flyer was just one of hundreds scattered around the city. But all of that rationalizing crumbled in an instant the moment she saw her father. He was standing near a trash bin, his back to them, his hands moving quickly, almost frantically. Ellie's brows furrowed as she slowed her steps. What was he doing? Lisa, walking beside her, noticed too. "Is that your dad?" she asked, squinting. Ellie didn't answer. She didn't need to. They watched as Henry reached for something stuck to the side of the bin. His fingers gripped the edges of the flyer, and, in one quick motion, he ripped it off, folded it hurriedly, and shoved it deep into his pocket. Ellie stopped in her tracks, her heart giving a hard, uneasy thump. Why was he doing that? Lisa, a step ahead, frowned. Henry. At the sound of her voice, Henry startled, turning sharply. For just a second, Ellie caught a glimpse of his face, his wide eyes, the tension in his jaw, before he smoothed it over with a casual, easygoing smile. "Oh, hey," he said lightly, brushing his hands off on his jeans as if nothing had happened. "I was just..." He hesitated. Ellie narrowed her eyes. That wasn't like him. Her father always had an answer for everything. Always. Lisa, oblivious to the tension creeping through Ellie's body, tilted her head. "What were you doing just now?" Henry let out a quick, short laugh, one that sounded just a little too forced. "Nothing, really. Just, some family must have put this up looking for their kid. Thought Ellie might see it and get upset." His smile was easy, but his voice wasn't. Ellie felt her stomach twist. Get upset? That made no sense. It was just a missing person flyer, something hundreds of people walked past every day. And besides, why would he even care if she saw it? Something about his reasoning didn't add up. Lisa, however, just sighed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, Henry, really? You didn't have to do that." Henry chuckled, too quickly, too naturally, and shrugged. "You know how she gets about stuff like this. She used to have nightmares about kidnappings when she was a kid, remember?" Ellie stiffened. That was true, when she was younger, she had been irrationally afraid of being taken. She had clung to her parents in crowded places, always worried someone would snatch her away. But the way Henry brought it up now, *** out of nowhere, as an excuse, *** felt wrong. Her throat went dry, her pulse suddenly a little too fast. Something was off. Something was very off. But before she could press further, Lisa sighed again, already moving ahead. "Come on, let's go. I need to find a cafe, I'm craving something sweet." Henry clapped his hands together as if that was the end of it. "Great idea. Ellie, you coming?" Ellie hesitated, glancing one last time at the trash bin, then at Henry's pocket, where the folded flyer was now hidden away. She could feel it, that deep, gnawing suspicion. But she swallowed it down and forced herself to nod. "Yeah," she murmured, finally following them. Still, as they walked away, she couldn't shake the image of that little girl's face from her mind. Or the way her father had acted like it was something worth hiding. The cozy warmth of the cafe did little to settle the strange unease that had taken root in Ellie's stomach. She sat at a small corner table, stirring a spoon through her hot chocolate absent-mindedly, her phone resting on the table beside her. The conversation between her parents drifted in and out of her awareness, something about where they should go next, maybe Westminster Abbey, maybe the London Eye, but Ellie wasn't listening. Her mind kept circling back to what she had seen. Henry had taken the missing person flyer. She still couldn't understand why. Was it really just to keep her from seeing it? That seemed too extreme, too deliberate. It wasn't like she was a little kid who would burst into tears at the sight of a missing child poster. And if he was really worried about her getting upset, wouldn't he have just ignored it instead of going out of his way to take it down? The questions churned in her mind, pulling at something deep in her subconscious, something that refused to settle. She exhaled slowly and reached for her phone, unlocking it to distract herself. Her social media app was already open, her photo from earlier still up on the screen. Over the past hour, it had racked up dozens of likes and comments, friends from back home leaving messages about how beautiful London looked, how jealous they were, how cute she and her dad were together. Ellie was about to type out a casual reply when her eyes landed on one particular comment. She frowned. It was from Carla, her best friend since middle school. "OMG Ellie, that girl in the missing flyer looks just like you. Like a mini version of you." Ellie's fingers froze above the keyboard. Her stomach dropped. Her heart skipped a beat, then started hammering against her ribs. She read the comment again. And then again. A strange, suffocating pressure filled her chest as a wave of dizziness washed over her. What was Carla talking about? Ellie's breath came just a little faster as she swiped back to the photo. Her hands were suddenly clammy, her pulse thudding loudly in her ears. She zoomed in on the background. There it was. The missing child flyer on the green trash bin, partially out of focus, but still visible enough to make out the child's face. The face that had made her uneasy before. Only now, staring at it again, really staring at it, she felt something much worse than unease. Her fingers trembled as she zoomed in further, the pixels blurring, distorting, but still. The girl did look like her. Same round cheeks. Same soft nose. Same light-colored eyes. Ellie's breath hitched. Her throat went dry. No, this was crazy. It was a coincidence. It had to be. Right? But the longer she stared at the small, grainy photo, the harder it was to ignore the awful, creeping feeling rising in her chest. Her mother's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Ellie? Honey, you okay?" Ellie jerked in her seat, her head snapping up. Lisa was watching her, brows furrowed in concern. I'm fine," Ellie said too quickly, locking her phone and stuffing it into her lap as if hiding it would make the terrible feeling go away. Lisa gave her a long, assessing look. "If you're tired, we can head back to the Airbnb for a bit," she offered. "No," Ellie blurted. "No, I'm fine. Just checking something on my phone." Lisa didn't look convinced, but she nodded, turning back to Henry, who was waving down a waiter for the check. Ellie took a shaky breath and forced herself to sip her hot chocolate, letting the warmth soothe the chill creeping through her body. This was ridiculous. She was overreacting. There was no way, absolutely no way, that a random missing child from a London flyer had anything to do with her. No way. And yet, why couldn't she shake the feeling that something wasn't right? The cafe was warm and inviting, with the scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee hanging in the air. Ellie sat across from her parents, her hands curled around her mug, but the heat did nothing to thaw the cold knot forming in her stomach. The moment she had read Carla's comment, something had shifted inside her, something deep, something dark and unshakable. And now, staring at Henry, watching the way he casually browsed the menu as if nothing was wrong, Ellie felt that unease begin to morph into something stronger. Suspicion. She placed her cup down and cleared her throat, keeping her voice carefully casual. "Hey, Dad." Henry didn't look up right away. "Yeah. She hesitated, choosing her words. That missing person flyer, the one from earlier. Do you still have it? That got his attention. His fingers stilled on the menu. It was only a second, barely noticeable, but Ellie saw it. Then, just as quickly, he relaxed, flipping a page like it was nothing. Oh, that? No, sweetheart, I must have lost it. Ellie's stomach clenched. Lost it? Lisa, who had been stirring sugar into her tea, glanced up, confused. What flyer? Henry gave an easy shrug. Nothing important. Just some old missing child poster someone stuck on a trash bin. I figured Ellie wouldn't want to see something sad while we're on vacation, so I took it down. Lisa frowned slightly. You took it down. Ellie barely heard her. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears, pounding with something close to panic. He was lying. She could hear it in the careful way he spoke, the way his shoulders stayed just a little too stiff, the way he refused to meet her eyes for more than a second. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the tablecloth. Dad, she said slowly, carefully, why would you take it if it was just some random flyer? Henry exhaled sharply, shaking his head as if she was being ridiculous. Because I didn't want you getting upset, Ellie. You used to have nightmares about kidnappings, remember? There it was again. That deflection. That way he kept trying to steer her away from the topic. Lisa, still confused, looked between them. Wait a second. Ellie, why do you even care about this flyer? What's going on? Ellie knew she had to be careful. If she pushed too hard, he would shut down completely. But if she didn't push at all, she'd never get answers. So she took a breath and forced herself to smile, leaning back slightly in her chair. I don't care, she lied. I was just curious. I mean, how often do you see missing person flyers, right? And then we saw the same one twice. It's weird. She reached for her phone. I took a picture of it, actually. She watched him closely. Henry didn't react outwardly, but she could see the tension in his fingers, the way they tightened slightly around the menu. So she kept going. Actually, you know what, she said, tilting her head. The little girl in the photo kinda looked like me when I was younger. Silence. Henry's jaw tightened. Lisa, blinking in confusion, laughed lightly. Oh, honey, I'm sure it's just a coincidence. What are the odds? Ellie leaned forward slightly, resting her arms on the table. Well, let's find out, she said casually. Do you have any childhood pictures of me on your phone? Henry went rigid. For the first time since this conversation started, his mask slipped. It was subtle. A barely there flicker in his expression, gone in an instant. But Ellie saw it. And suddenly, she knew. She was right to be suspicious. Henry cleared his throat, too loudly, too abruptly. Not on my phone, he said quickly. I had to clear storage before we left for the trip, so I moved all our older photos to the computer at home. Lisa, who had been sipping her tea, paused mid-drink, blinking. Wait, you did? She asked, setting her cup down. Henry nodded stiffly. Yeah. My phone was running out of space. Lisa frowned, clearly confused. I don't remember you mentioning that. Ellie's heart pounded. Neither do I, Mom. But she didn't say it out loud. She just sat there, forcing herself to look relaxed, nodding as if she accepted the answer. But inside, she could feel the world tilting. Everything felt wrong. Her father was lying to her. Her mother didn't even seem to know why. And if she kept pushing, she knew she'd hit something they didn't want her to find. For the first time in her life, Ellie felt like a stranger sitting at the same table as her own family. And the worst part? She had no idea if she even wanted to know the truth. Ellie tried to act normal as they finished their meal, but inside, her thoughts raced like wildfire. She pushed food around on her plate, hardly tasting it. Her father had lied to her, she was sure of it now. Why? Why would he delete her childhood photos? It didn't make sense. People didn't just erase years of memories for extra phone storage, not when they had hundreds of other useless pictures they could delete instead. And her mother's reaction. Lisa had seemed surprised. She hadn't known about the so-called storage issue. That meant Henry had made that excuse up on the spot. Her stomach twisted as she replayed the conversation over and over, trying to find a way to explain it away. Maybe there was a logical reason. Maybe she was overthinking everything. But deep down, she knew she wasn't. Something was wrong. And whatever it was, Henry was trying to hide it from her. Her fingers curled around the napkin in her lap as she stole a glance at him. He looked perfectly relaxed, leaning back in his chair, sipping his coffee as if nothing had happened. But Ellie wasn't fooled anymore. She knew what she had seen. That momentary stiffness. The flicker of unease. The way his voice had tightened ever so slightly. She didn't know what he was hiding. But she was going to find out. The woman across the street. Lisa set her fork down and let out a satisfied sigh. "Well, that was lovely," she said, reaching for her purse. "Should we walk around a bit more before heading back?" Ellie forced a smile. "Yeah, sounds good." Henry nodded, flagging down the waiter for the bill. Ellie pulled out her phone, pretending to check her notifications while her thoughts spun in 1,000 directions. She had to get answers. Maybe there were old photos on her mom's phone. Maybe she could check Henry's laptop when they got back to the Airbnb. She needed something, anything, to confirm that she was just imagining things. Because if she wasn't. She swallowed hard, not wanting to finish that thought. The waiter returned with the bill, and Henry quickly paid. Moments later, they stepped outside, the afternoon air crisp and cool against Ellie's skin. She hadn't even taken 2 steps onto the pavement before her eyes caught something that made her entire body freeze. A woman. Standing across the street. She was pinning up a flyer. Another one. Another missing person flyer. Ellie's breath hitched in her throat. The woman's movements were quick, practiced, like she had done this 1,000 times before. She reached into a bag, pulled out another flyer, and began pressing it against a nearby lamppost, smoothing it out carefully with her hands. Ellie didn't need to see the photo on the paper to know what it was. It was the same one. The same little girl's face. The same bold, capital letters screaming, "Still missing." A shiver ran down her spine, but she wasn't the only one who noticed. Beside her, Henry suddenly stiffened. His entire body went rigid, his grip tightening around his wallet so hard that his knuckles turned white. Ellie whipped her head toward him, heart pounding. His face was pale. Too pale. Lisa had noticed too. "Henry?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. "What's wrong?" Henry didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the woman across the street, his jaw clenched so tight that Ellie thought he might crack a tooth. Ellie felt a chill rush through her veins. Why was he so afraid? Why was he acting like he had just seen a ghost? The woman finished pinning up the flyer and stepped back, surveying her work. Then, as if she felt their eyes on her, she turned slightly. For the briefest moment, her gaze met Henry's. And then, her face changed. Ellie saw it. The flicker of recognition. The way her lips parted slightly, her body tensing as if she was about to run toward them. Henry reacted first. "Let's go." His voice was sharp, panicked, completely different from his usual calm tone. He grabbed Ellie's arm, not hard, but firm enough to start pulling her away from the street. Lisa frowned. "Henry, what?" "Let's go," he repeated, his voice too urgent, too unlike him. Lisa, now clearly unsettled, hesitated before following. Ellie didn't move. She couldn't. Her feet were rooted to the spot, her pulse thundering in her ears as she stared at the woman across the street. She was still looking at them. No, she was looking at Ellie. Ellie's chest tightened. The woman looked like she wanted to say something. Do something. But she didn't. Instead, her hands slowly curled into fists at her sides, her eyes shining with something Ellie couldn't quite place. Grief. Shock. Desperation. Then, before Ellie could even take a step toward her, Henry's grip tightened slightly, pulling her along. Ellie's breath caught. She turned, staring at him as his pace quickened, leading them away from the cafe. And for the first time in her entire life, she realized she wasn't sure if she trusted him anymore. The air in the Airbnb apartment felt thicker than usual, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the unspoken tension that had been brewing since they left the cafe. Henry and Lisa were acting normal, but too normal, as if they were trying to force the ease back into the day, pretending nothing had happened. Ellie could barely keep up the act. Her mind whirled relentlessly, replaying the woman's face across the street, the way her father had practically dragged her away. Henry knew something. And Ellie was done waiting for him to tell her. She needed to find out the truth herself. The jacket pocket. After dinner, Henry stretched and let out a long, exaggerated sigh. I think I'm gonna take a quick nap before we head back out. Lisa chuckled. Not as young as you used to be, huh? Henry smirked. Something like that. Ellie forced a casual smile, nodding along as if she weren't quietly unraveling inside. She watched as Henry disappeared into the bedroom, the door clicking shut behind him. This was her chance. Her pulse spiked as she carefully stepped toward the couch where Henry's jacket was casually draped over the armrest. Her fingers felt too stiff, too tense, as she reached for the pocket, her heart pounding in her ears. She hesitated for only a second before slipping her hand inside. Her fingers brushed against paper. Something creased and folded. The flyer. The one he had ripped off the trash bin. Ellie's breath hitched as she pulled it out, unfolding the slightly crumpled sheet with trembling hands. And then she saw it. The little girl's face. Wide, innocent eyes staring back at her. Her heart plunged into her stomach as her eyes flew to the bold black letters at the top. Still missing. Sarah Wells. Her breath stilled in her chest. Sarah. Her gaze dropped to the date at the bottom. Missing since August 2005. Her own birth year. Ellie felt her throat tighten painfully, her entire body going cold. This couldn't mean anything. It was a coincidence. It had to be. The social media search. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and snapped a quick photo of the flyer, heart racing. She needed more proof. Swiping away her shaking hands, she opened Facebook, searching for her father's profile. If she could just find an old childhood photo of herself, maybe it would erase this insane idea in her head. Maybe she was being ridiculous. Maybe she was wrong. She scrolled frantically, years of family vacations and birthday posts flashing before her eyes. But something wasn't right. There were no baby photos. None. The earliest picture of her was when she was around 5 years old. Ellie's breathing hitched, her vision blurring as she scrolled faster, desperately searching for something earlier, something before that age. But there was nothing. She froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. No baby pictures. No toddler pictures. Not a single photo of her before the age of 5. Her fingers trembled as she zoomed in on one of the oldest photos she could find. A family trip to the beach, her dad holding her in his arms. Ellie felt a wave of nausea. Because now, looking at it through different eyes, she saw what she hadn't noticed before. She looked older than 5 in the picture. 6, maybe. Possibly even 7. Her stomach twisted, her hands going ice cold. And then, as if something had seized control of her, she switched back to the flyer. Back to Sarah Wells' face. She zoomed in. Looked at the shape of her nose. The arch of her brows. The same round cheeks. The same jawline. The same. Ellie dropped her phone, her breath tearing out of her like she'd been punched in the gut. Her legs shook beneath her, her entire body flooded with horror. Because the face on the missing child flyer was her own. Ellie staggered back from the couch, her breath shallow, her body numb with shock. Her mind refused to process what she had just seen, what it meant. The flyer in her hands, the photo on her phone, the fact that there were no childhood pictures of her before the age of 5, it all pointed to something that was impossible. But it was real. Her stomach churned violently, nausea clawing at her throat, but she couldn't stop now. She needed answers. Her body moved before she could think, legs carrying her down the narrow hallway, her hands brushing against the cold walls of the Airbnb as she approached her parents' bedroom door. It was partially closed, the soft glow of a bedside lamp spilling through the narrow gap. She was about to knock, demand answers, force them to tell her the truth, when she heard it. A voice. Her father's voice. She keeps asking about the missing child flyer. What if she finds out? Ellie froze, her breath catching in her throat. The blood in her veins ran ice-cold. The fear in Henry's voice was undeniable. He was panicking. Which meant, there was something to panic about. Her fingers trembled as she pressed her palm flat against the door, then leaned in, her ear barely an inch from the wood. For a moment, there was only silence. Then her mother's voice, soft, guilt-ridden, broken. She will find out, Henry. And she will hate us. Ellie's heart slammed against her ribs. We kidnapped her. Her vision blurred, the world tilting violently beneath her feet. A sharp, choking noise rose in her throat, but she clamped a hand over her mouth, pressing herself hard against the wall, trying to stop the room from spinning out of control. No. No. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She was Ellie Gibson. She had grown up in the US. She had a normal childhood. She had 2 loving parents who raised her, who celebrated her birthdays, who took her on road trips and hugged her when she cried. She wasn't. She wasn't kidnapped. A cold sweat slicked her palms, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. This was a mistake. A joke. A misunderstanding. Right? But the sound of her mother's voice, thick with years of guilt, years of hiding a terrible truth, kept echoing in her head. We kidnapped her. Ellie clutched at her chest, her breath coming too fast, too ragged, her fingers shaking so violently she had to grip the doorframe just to stay standing. Her entire life, everything she had ever known, was a lie. A stolen identity. And the 2 people she had trusted more than anyone in the world were the ones who had taken it from her. Ellie's body moved before her mind could stop her. She had heard enough. She couldn't stand outside this door 1 second longer, pretending that everything was fine. Her entire life had been a lie. And the 2 people she had trusted most, the people who raised her, the people she had loved, had stolen it from her. A sob ripped through her throat, but she shoved it down, replaced it with rage. She didn't knock. She kicked the door open. Henry and Lisa jumped at the sudden intrusion, their guilty faces snapping toward her like they had been caught committing a crime. Because they had. Ellie wasn't their daughter. She was their victim. Tell me the truth. Her voice tore through the room, raw and broken, filled with a fury she had never known she possessed. Henry stumbled back, his face drained of color. Ellie, sweetheart, just listen. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth, eyes glossy with unshed tears, her entire body trembling. Ellie's chest heaved, her breath coming out in ragged gasps. You kidnapped me, she whispered, the words poison on her tongue. Didn't you? Neither of them spoke. And that was the answer. Lisa let out a soft, broken sob, but Henry took a step toward Ellie, his hands up in surrender. "Sweetheart, please," he begged. "It's not like that. We love you. We raised you. We gave you a better life than." Ellie shook her head violently, stepping back. "A better life?" she shouted. "You stole me. From my real parents. You lied to me for 18 years. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. They didn't deserve her tears. Lisa sank onto the bed, her body folding in on itself, her cries muffled behind trembling fingers. Henry's expression hardened, his desperation morphing into something darker, more dangerous. "You don't understand," he hissed. "We are your parents. We were the ones who raised you, who gave you everything. You can't just throw that away because of some stupid flyer." Ellie snapped. "Stupid," she screamed. "That stupid flyer is the reason I know the truth. It's the reason I know I've been living in a," her voice broke, but she forced the words out. "A prison." Henry flinched, something dark flickering across his face. Ellie took a shaky breath, forcing her voice to steady. "I'm going to the police." Lisa let out a strangled sob, her head shaking violently. "Ellie, no." Henry's face twisted. "You can't do that," he said, stepping toward her again. Ellie backed up quickly, her stomach twisting with fear. "I can. And I will," she spat. "You're criminals. Both of you. And you're going to jail for what you did." Henry lunged. His hands closed around Ellie's wrist, gripping her tight, his fingers bruising her skin. Panic exploded inside her, a raw, suffocating terror clawing up her throat. "Let me go," she screamed, thrashing against his grip, kicking, shoving, but his hold was too strong. "No," Henry growled, his voice dangerously low. "I can't let you do that." Ellie saw it then. The man she had called Dad for 18 years, wasn't her father. He was a kidnapper. A criminal. A liar. And if she didn't get out of here, she wasn't sure she ever would. Lisa shot up from the bed, her body shaking. "Henry, stop," she cried, rushing forward, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him off Ellie. But Henry wouldn't budge. "We can't let her leave," he shouted at Lisa. "Don't you get it? If she goes to the police, it's over." Ellie kept fighting, but his grip was like a vice, his panic morphing into something dangerous. Lisa stood frozen, her hands trembling, her eyes darting between Ellie and Henry. And then, her expression changed. Like a switch had been flipped. Like something inside her had finally snapped. She spun toward the bedside table, her fingers wrapping around something heavy. A cast iron pan. Henry was too busy holding Ellie to notice. Too blinded by his desperation to see what was coming next. Lisa swung. Crack. The sound of metal colliding with bone echoed through the room. Henry collapsed instantly, his grip on Ellie slackening as he crumpled to the floor. The world stood still. Ellie staggered back, her breath caught in her throat, her wild, horrified eyes locked onto her mother. Lisa was shaking violently, the pan still clutched in her trembling hands. She dropped it, the heavy pan hitting the floor with a dull, deafening thud. Henry lay motionless, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, blood trickling from his scalp. Lisa turned to Ellie, her face streaked with tears. Her lip trembled, her entire body racked with violent sobs. And then, she grabbed Ellie's hands. "Run," Lisa choked out, sobbing as she fumbled with the bathroom key, unlocking the door. "Go, Ellie. Go before he wakes up." Ellie just stared at her, breathless, stunned. Lisa's eyes, so full of guilt, so full of something almost like love, met hers one last time. "You deserve to know the truth," she whispered. You deserve to set things right." Ellie's chest heaved, her entire body torn between fear, rage, and sorrow. Lisa stepped aside, her face crumpling. Ellie hesitated for only a second. Then she turned and ran. She tore through the apartment, the front door ripping open beneath her trembling hands. And as she burst onto the dark streets of London, tears blurring her vision, panic clawing at her lungs. She knew nothing would ever be the same again. The streets of London blurred past Ellie as she ran, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. Her mind was a hurricane of emotions, rage, fear, betrayal, but she forced herself to focus on one thing. She had to get to the police. Her legs burned, her hands trembled, but she didn't stop. The weight of the missing person flyer, folded and crumpled in her grip, felt heavier than it should. As if it carried the full weight of 18 years of lies. The city buzzed around her, tourists, pedestrians, taxis honking in the distance, but Ellie barely registered any of it. Her world had shrunk to a single destination. The police station. The building appeared ahead, a simple brick structure, a blue police sign glowing above the entrance. She stumbled inside, her breath ragged, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. A few officers turned to look at her, their expressions shifting from mild curiosity to immediate concern. A female officer with graying hair and kind eyes stepped forward. "Miss," she asked gently. "Are you all right?" Ellie's knees almost buckled as she approached the front desk. She lifted her shaking hands, placed the flyer onto the counter, and looked the officer straight in the eyes. Her voice came out hoarse, fragile, but firm. "I think I'm this missing girl. The investigation begins." Everything after that felt like a blur. The officers took her into a private room, away from the curious glances of others in the station. They asked her questions, her name, her background, what had happened to her. Ellie told them everything. She told them about Henry and Lisa Gibson. About the photo she had taken with her dad. About how she had noticed the missing child flyer in the background. She told them how Henry had ripped it off the trash bin, how he had lied to her face, how she had searched for childhood photos, only to realize that her entire past before the age of 5 didn't exist. Then she told them the worst part. The conversation she had overheard. The words that had shattered her world. "We kidnapped her." The officers listened intently, taking notes, their eyes dark with understanding. One officer, a tall man with a stern but kind face, nodded slowly. "We're going to need a DNA test," he said. "It's the only way to confirm this." Ellie nodded, barely breathing, barely feeling the swab as they brushed it against the inside of her cheek. Her hands clenched into tight fists in her lap. Her entire life had come down to this moment. If the results came back, if she was really this girl from the flyer, then she wasn't Ellie Gibson. She was Sarah Wells. And her real family was out there. Waiting. Searching. Hoping. Meeting her real parents. The hours dragged on like a lifetime. Ellie sat in the small police waiting room, her arms wrapped around herself. The weight of everything she had learned pressed against her chest like a vice, threatening to pull her under. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she even wanted to know. Then, at some point, an officer entered the room. His eyes were soft, his voice gentle. "Miss Wells," he said, and the words sent a shockwave through her. Wells. Not Gibson. Wells. Ellie barely managed a nod, her hands gripping the edge of the chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "There are 2 people here to see you." Ellie's heart stopped. She already knew who they were. The door opened slowly, and there, standing in the doorway, were 2 strangers. A man and a woman. The woman, Nessa Wells, covered her mouth with both hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The man, Edric Wells, stood frozen, his eyes wide, his breath caught in his throat, as if he were too afraid to move, too afraid this was a dream that might slip through his fingers. For a long, agonizing second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then, like a dam breaking, Nessa rushed forward, her arms wrapping around Ellie in a way that felt both foreign and familiar all at once. Ellie stiffened, unsure what to do, unsure how to feel. She was being held by a woman she didn't know. And yet, something deep inside her, something buried beneath the years of stolen memories, whispered. "This is right." Ellie slowly, hesitantly, lifted her arms and hugged her back. Nessa sobbed into her hair, clutching her like she was afraid she might disappear again. "We searched for you," she gasped, her voice breaking. "We never stopped looking. Oh, my baby, we thought we'd lost you forever." Edric moved in then, wrapping his arms around both of them, his body trembling with the weight of 18 years of grief, of loss, of longing. Ellie felt his tears against her temple, felt his body shake against hers, felt the raw, aching love in his embrace. And for the first time since she had discovered the truth. For the first time since her world had collapsed. She let herself cry. She let herself feel it. Because this was real. They were real. And even though she wasn't sure how to move forward. Even though her heart was still tangled in a web of pain, anger, and loss. She knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. Henry and Lisa's arrest. Ellie sat in a quiet room at the police station, the sterile scent of paperwork and old coffee filling the air. Everything felt surreal, like she was floating outside of her own body, watching her life unravel from a distance. A detective had just finished speaking with her, explaining what would happen next. Henry and Lisa had been arrested. For child abduction. She had sat there, nodding numbly, but it hadn't fully sunk in yet. Henry and Lisa weren't just going home to America after this. They were going to prison. She should feel relieved. She should feel vindicated. But as she sat there, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, all she felt was a confusing, tangled mess of emotions. An officer walked past the waiting room, leading her toward a viewing area where she could see into the processing room. Ellie stepped forward, pressing shaking hands against the cold glass, and there they were. Henry stood stiff, his face pale and drawn, his once confident presence now cracked, broken, and stripped away. He wasn't looking at anyone, his gaze locked on the floor, his shoulders slumped in a way that made him seem smaller than Ellie had ever seen him before. Lisa, on the other hand, was sobbing uncontrollably, her hands trembling as she was fingerprinted. She wasn't fighting. She wasn't screaming. She just looked devastated. Ellie should have hated them. She should have felt nothing but anger and betrayal. But as she watched them, the only parents she had ever known, the people who had raised her, the people who had stolen her life, all she felt was heartbreak. She could still remember Lisa brushing her hair at night. Henry carrying her on his shoulders when she was little. They had lied to her. They had kidnapped her. But they had also loved her. And Ellie didn't know how to reconcile that. Lisa lifted her head, her tear-streaked eyes locking onto Ellie's through the glass. For a second, they just stared at each other. Ellie saw so much in her mother's face, guilt, sorrow, desperation, but most of all, love. Lisa mouthed something through the glass. "I'm sorry." Ellie's chest tightened. She turned away. She didn't wave. She didn't cry. She just walked out of the room, leaving Henry and Lisa behind for good. Ellie's new beginning. Ellie sat outside the police station, the evening air crisp and cool against her skin. She wasn't sure how long she had been sitting there, watching the city move around her, people going about their lives as if her world hadn't just shattered and reformed into something unrecognizable. She didn't know what to do now. She didn't know who she was supposed to be. For 18 years, she had been Ellie Gibson, an American girl with loving parents, an ordinary life. Now, she was Sarah Wells, the missing child who had been stolen from London as a toddler, the daughter of two people who had spent nearly 2 decades searching for her. Ellie, Sarah, let out a long breath, staring at her reflection in the glass window beside her. She had her father's eyes. Her mother's nose. She had spent her whole life thinking she belonged to people she didn't. But now, for the first time, she saw herself. Not Ellie Gibson, the stolen child. Not Sarah Wells, the lost girl. Just her. A girl who had been given a second chance. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know how she would ever forgive, or if she even wanted to. But she knew one thing for sure. She was going to reclaim her true identity. She was going to find out who she was meant to be. And for the first time, that thought didn't scare her. It set her free. And just like that, Ellie's entire world changed forever. The people she had trusted the most were the ones who had stolen her life. But this is only the beginning. What happens next? Will Ellie be able to reconnect with her real family? Can she ever forgive the people who raised her, or will she be haunted by their betrayal forever? If you want to know what happens in part 2, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this unbelievable true story. Let me know in the comments, what would you do if you were in Ellie's shoes? Until next time, thanks for watching.